This is the Fantastic Books Podcast,
the fantasy and sci-fi book review podcast for fantasy fanatics, book nerds, and lovers of lore and stories.
covering some of the most loved fantasy series as well as brand new novels.
With your hosts, Anna
And Sam. Let's see what we're reading this week. We're live! Greetings, readers. This is Sam.
and Anna.
And this is Fantastic Books and How to Read Them. Episode 4.
Chapters 23 through 32. Which in retrospect may have been a little bit too much to read, but we read it.
Because we're ambitious.
That's why we're a little late on this one. Hey, editing Anna here. It, in fact, was too much for us to read, and we bit off more than we could chew. So this episode will cover up through chapter 27, and next episode will cover up through chapter 32. Before we start, I do have an announcement. We now have a website, fantasticbookspod.com, so you can go there to find all the episodes. There's also a little bit of information about us and the podcast in general. And obviously, as we go through and have more books and the podcast evolves, we'll add to that webpage. But you can find us there. And hopefully, because we finally set that up, we'll probably get our social media going soon, which in all likelihood will probably just be pictures of our cats with books.
These are the real things the viewers and listeners want. And with our website, you'll be able to find links to iTunes and Spotify. You can learn a little bit about us and see the faces behind the voices and what got us into this.
Yeah, so definitely give us a visit online. And I think, without further ado, I'd really like to get into these chapters because this is probably one of my favorite parts of the whole book.
Yeah, it's pretty great, so let's give it a go.
So we last left our hero in the saddest part of the story, probably.
Yeah, it was just a lot of intense trauma, and
he'd been beaten to a pulp on midwinter, so the worst holiday season you could ever imagine.
Merry Christmas, season's beatings.
Oh no! Season's beatings.
I think I'd rather take coal for Christmas than season's beatings.
Yeah, absolutely. At least he could probably use coal to warm himself up a little bit.
Yeah.
So we start with chapter 23, The Burning Wheel. And Kvothe made his way to Trapis's and is working his way through the fever and working off his injuries from his season's beatings, as we have so called them. Tanny, one of the sick children there, asks for a story, and Trapis tells the story of Telu and the beginning of Telu's power, and it's very much a religion origin story for the
Tellin.
The Tellin religion. I don't know if you want to go through or just kind of talk about it in general.
Yeah, so, I mean, just to kind of give a quick narration, I know a lot of these readers already understand the origin of Telu. He's depicted as kind of like a Jesus-inspired character, but...
Well, Telu's the main god.
Yeah, he's...
So, this is like the story of him taking like an earthly form, which is similar to Jesus and some other religious figures throughout different religions. So in the story, the world is very bad and corrupt, and Telu the god exists, but people aren't worshipping him or paying thanks to him or acknowledging him in any way. So he thinks that kind of everyone's kind of straight off the path.
Yeah, however, there is this one girl, her name was Periel, and
She's like the only good one left.
Yeah, she knew that, people were bad, but they were kind of bad for a reason because the world was tough, and she never judged others, and she treated everyone kindly and respectfully.
The world's tough, but there's also demons living amongst people, which is obviously different from a lot of modern religion stories we have now.
Yeah.
But I think the way that it's described is there's kind of a spirit realm, which would be the Fae, and then there's the human world, and there's all these demons that have come out of the Fae realm and are living amongst the humans and wreaking havoc and corrupting people and causing a bunch of issues there.
Yeah.
So Telu comes and visits Periel in a dream.
And in the dream, she then, through spirit love, is with child. She becomes a holy vessel, the Virgin Periel, somewhat like the Virgin Mary, and strangely enough, within, what is it, like a couple of days?
Isn't it also, like, ancient Greek gods kind of did the same thing? They could just kind of, like, not impregnate, but just, like, spiritually, like, impregnate people with something else?
Our girl, Periel, gets knocked up by Telu's spirit, and she gives birth to a child, which she names Menda.
But she gives birth within 3 months. It's, like, really fast.
Oh, everything is expedited.
Yeah, he grows up within, like, 6 months or so? Something crazy like that?
Yeah, so word gets out that Periel's got a baby, and everyone's like, well, who she's with, this is, like, slanderous and crazy, and they hear that...
They're worried that she's given birth to a demon's baby.
Because
so they come knocking on her door.
Nobody's been with her, yet she's had a kid, like, what's up?
Mm-hmm.
So when they knock on the door and demand to see the child, it's not really a child, it's a young man.
Adult man.
Yeah, about 18 years old.
He identifies himself as Menda.
Son of himself.
Also Telu. He says, like, my mother called me Menda, but I'm Telu, son of myself. So he steps forward in front of this crowd. A lot of the people don't necessarily believe him from the get-go. It's very much like a trial situation. And Periel's actually really kind. She says, like, you can't blame these people. They live with demons. Like, they've had a rough life, so, like, why are you surprised that they're not just immediately following you?
And so there's this really interesting part where there is, I believe it's a blacksmith by the name of Rangan that Telu or Menda approaches and basically looks within him and tells Reagan to his face all of his sins, all the sins that he's committed in his lifetime, and gives him 2 options. He says, you can either walk the straight and narrow path with me to the end, or you can just go on your own. And it's basically a symbology of, like, are you going to repent for your sins and kind of start anew, or are you going to stay on this path of wickedness till you die? And there's a really cool line. I think he says all roads
lead to death.
Yes.
But you can either suffer now and be rewarded later, or live the way you want now and suffer eternally. Which is very similar to most Christian religions. I think most religions in general have kind of, and even philosophies too, without a religious figure in them.
Yeah.
Like a living altruistically now will reap a reward later.
Exactly.
Versus just living however you want now, you will be eternally punished forever.
Yeah, it's pretty...
Or karma will come and get you, or... And that's not really... I mean, that's the Western interpretation of karma. But anyway, that's the gist of it.
Yeah, because he says, and what's on your side? Pain now, punishment now. For all that you've done, it can't be avoided. But I am here too. This is my path. And so Reagan then decides to cross over.
It's interesting too because he says, like, I am here too. So he's there suffering along with his followers.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective, because in my thought process when he's like, but I'm here now, like I'll provide comfort and support.
Oh, I imagined as, like, I'm here, he took this, like, human form so that he could understand their suffering and suffer with them, and then, like, he would be able to empathize with them.
That's cool. I mean, 2 sides, same coin.
Yeah, I don't think either of us is wrong.
I am right. No.
I'm right. You're wrong. Shut the book.
That's it. Well, thanks for the final episode of Fantastic Books.
It's been a good run, everyone. We made it through 4.
Farewell. No. So, Reagan is the first of these people to decide to cross... Reagan.
Not Ronald Reagan.
Okay.
That's Nixon.
Oh, that's right. We are getting, like, so off. Okay.
Alright.
Refocus.
Focus.
So, Reagan crosses the line, and he stands with Telu.
No, Telu beats him up with his hammer.
Yeah, I was literally just about to read that.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay.
So everyone who crosses over the line gets struck down by Telu. They're, like, crying, they're in a lot of pain, but then Telu says, like, you know, you crossed, it was brave and I'm proud of you, and he renames Rangan Wereth, the Forger of the Path, which is actually a really cool name.
Yeah, it is.
He gave him a cool new name. So everyone who crosses over gets struck with the hammer, but then Taylor gives them new names and heals them after. So, like, basically they had to still pay punishment for what they had done in the past, but now they have a new, like, a fresh slate. Which, like I said, a lot of this really draws on existing religious motifs.
Baptisms or, being born again.
Yeah, which is fine, because it is a religion, so it makes sense that it draws on stuff that exists in our world. So in the end, 7 stay on the other side of the line, and I think there's a fan theory that the 7 that stay are the 7 Chandrian, correct?
Yeah.
Which is interesting, though, because it says some of them are demons and some are not. And I thought all of the Chandrian would be humans that had been corrupted versus being actual demons.
I think it's more than just, like, the little finite details of, like, some were demons, some were not. I think it's more of just a symbology of the 7 that resisted Telu.
Yeah, but jumping ahead to reference the story of Lanre later, and Lanre becoming Haliax, the leader of the Chandrian.
Yeah.
I would have assumed that because he was a man who became corrupted, the other Chandrian were also men who became corrupted, not necessarily started out as
and became
demons.
more than a man.
Yeah.
That's actually a really good point I didn't consider. I like that.
Because I always assumed that the Chandrian were stuck between the Fey realm and the human realm because they were humans that had some weird magical corruption thing happen to them.
It's hard to pinpoint.
It's so frustrating because we're all in the same boat of not knowing who the Chandrian are, not having enough information about them. And that's obviously, like, the whole point of the books. Yeah, I wish we knew. And we're not even sure. That's a fan theory that those 7 who resist become the Chandrian, but it's a possibility. After Telu does that in the first town, he goes around and travels to other towns and basically asks everyone to decide which path they want to be on, and in the end, there's one demon who keeps escaping Encanis, who was actually the one that was in the pageant.
Yes,
the winter pageant. So Encanis is like the king of demons. He's a devil-like figure. Telu's like chasing him all around the world, and everywhere he goes, Encanis had just been there. So people are dead. Wells have been poisoned. All the crops are withered.
Milk has been spoiled. No,
that's the Chandrian, not Encanis.
And for my power, my milk.
You actually mentioned that the other day because we went to the store and we don't usually drink any milk, but we bought milk and we got home and we needed it for one thing and it was spoiled. And you brought up how annoying it would be if the Chandrian just came around and spoiled all your milk. Like, it's such a petty thing to do, but it is really frustrating. So, we were laughing about that the other day. Anyway, Telu is chasing Encanis around the world, and finally he catches up to him in... It's a great city, but they don't ever say which city it is. Oh, I'm sorry. Encanis destroys 6 cities, and then in the 7th city, Telu saves the city and catches Encanis. So, 6 great cities are destroyed. And in the next story in this set of chapters, the story of Lanre, there are 7 cities that are destroyed. So there's lots of repeats in stories. And I'm not sure if the events are the same and have been, like, if 7 cities were destroyed and somehow that event became involved in multiple myths over time in this world, or if 7 cities were destroyed multiple times.
Or maybe it's just one story, shady details. So
that's what I mean.
Maybe Haliax is Encanis. I don't know.
It's very confusing. I think there's supposed to be parallels between the 2 stories.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's supposed to be the same story. Although, according to Skarpi, it's all one story.
Good callback.
I know. So anyway, Telu catches up to Encanis and strikes him down with his iron forge hammer, and because Encanis is a demon and the hammer is iron and Telu is very mighty and powerful.
God.
Encanis is not dead, but catatonic. So Telu carries Encanis to a smithy, and they take several days and build this gigantic iron wheel, which I think is now the symbol of the Telan priests.
Yeah, it's their equivalent of the cross.
Telu gathers up Encanis and tethers him to this gigantic wheel, which has 6 spokes, which I think is supposed to represent the 6 cities he destroyed. Puts it against a tree, and I think Telu actually then takes a nap, which is kind of odd.
Well, it's like at the end of his labor, maybe rests.
Yeah, it's just crazy, I think. You're
My
like,
greatest
your
foe!
greatest enemy. You have like one last thing to do. You're like, I'll just take a quick little nap. Don't worry, all the people in this town, they won't be able to do anything if he escapes.
The most powerful demon? I take a nap.
I know. Nap time.
I take a nap here. Good night.
I know. So he actually gives Incanus a chance to repent, basically, and Incanus tries to lie and say, like, fine, I agree with you, let me go. And it doesn't work.
Well, it's like the wheel, like, tolls like a bell. Like, there's like a reaction to him lying.
That's right. So Incanus then, instead of, like, when he's finally caught, says, like, I don't regret it. If I had to do this again, I would only change how fast I ran and would run away further than you, so you wouldn't be able to catch me.
And he'd make people suffer more. It's a really cool line that he says.
Yeah, bite and break you. If you give me half an hour, I'd do such things that these wretched gawping peasants would go mad with fear. I would drink their children's blood and bathe in women's tears.
That's it. That's horribly cryptic.
It's so creepy. And then it's even scary because it says he would have said more, but, like, he's, like, literally, like, about to burst against the chains that are holding him in, so he, like, runs out of breath. Before Taylor took his big old nap, he had asked people to dig a pit, and there were a dozen trees burning in the bottom of this pit, and so there's just, like, this, like, bed of hot coals in this huge pit, and he pushes the wheel with Incanus into it, and Incanus is burning, but crazy Incanus, like, breaks through two of the chains and is almost about to escape. I don't know if the fire, if it was so painful that he just had, like, the equivalent of, like, an adrenaline rush and, like, ripped the fire, or if the fire is so hot that the chains melted.
Could be a combination of the two.
Could be. Either way, it's very intense.
Yeah, Incanus is literally roasting, so, like, Hulk strength comes out. It's
crazy. So Taylor jumps in, the two go down together, and it's just, like, this crazy moment of sacrifice. Because Taylor's, like, not even scared. He's like, I am my own father and my own son, so, like, I existed before and I existed after. This isn't going to affect me in any way. But he does vanquish Incanus, and, like, they go down in this, like, fire pit, and it's so cool and intense. It's very interesting because there's actually, they mention where it happens. It was in Ator, so this is an actual place in the world. Like I mentioned, there's a map in the front of the book, and the Aturan Empire is a place. So it's neat that, like, there's an actual physical place associated with this still. And because of this whole story of the fire and them burning to ash, the Talon color is gray. As he mentioned this, Trapis kind of ends his story, and Kvothe realizes that maybe Trapis was a Talon priest before. His robe is so dirty that it could have been gray, but it's hard to tell. It was interesting because he, at the beginning, said he didn't know any stories, and then he told this story, and Kvothe mentioned sometimes that the story was really strong, and it seemed like he remembered a lot of it, and other times he really was grasping for it and couldn't quite remember. So it's interesting because we don't get any more of a backstory on Trapis, but it seems to me that he was probably related to the clergy in some way.
Yeah, no, because he definitely has, like, this whole priestly or religious kind of morality. You know, he's tending to all these, like, orphans, sick, and, like, lost children.
But I always wonder if he was, like, banished by the church, or if he didn't agree with the church and left it, or if he's just someone else. But either way, that story is really important, I think, especially when we can talk about the story of Lanre a little bit with all of the parallels between the two. And it also does give us information about, like, demons in the world and how they're vanquished and kind of the origins of religion in the whole series and the universe of the series. Chapter 24, Shadows Themselves. I actually didn't remember this chapter, but you brought it up before we even started.
Yeah, no, this chapter was really interesting. So Kvothe is healed from, like, being sick and beat up and kind of catching cold from
He's back
his
on his, like,
ordeal.
little rooftop hideout area, right?
Yeah, he's back at it. And, like, honestly, just rogue skills, Dungeons & Dragons style, our boy is just leveling up. He's gotten really good at, like, pickpocketing and lockpicking and just kind of like wigging and waggling through like crowds and just being really nimble, and it's just really
He also
cool.
mentioned he's learned to avoid people who are addicted to denner resin.
Yeah.
Which is basically just like crack cocaine, but it's...
Crack cocaine!
Well, it was confusing at first because he said he learned to avoid people with white teeth, and at first I thought he meant really, really rich people because they would never give money to peasants, and he'd also had that brush with Hillside when he went over to like the wealthy side of town, but it's actually the sign of these people who have become addicted to this drug, and their addiction will make them crazy, so it's best to avoid them.
Yeah, no, it's kind of like...
It's like any city. Like, there's definitely sketchy parts, but it's just a neat, like, world-building thing, in my opinion, to talk about. Like, yes, there's poverty and inequality, but to also talk about, like, drug use in a fantastic and medieval-style book, I don't think has ever really come up in any other fantasy I've ever read.
Yeah. And so, yeah, he learns how to, avoid these sweet eaters, people who are addicted to denner resin because it bleaches their teeth, and if somebody who's been addicted to denner resin that long and has, like, brilliantly bright white teeth, like, they will literally kill you for pennies, so he's learned a lot of street smarts in the time that he's been surviving in Tarbian.
Mm-hmm.
There's this really just disturbingly sad and horrible scene that is described one evening where Kvothe is like in his like hideaway spot underneath the overhang of 3 roofs where he lives. A young boy of maybe like 8 is stalked and surrounded by like 5 or 6 like young men, and it's just horrible. They straight up like rape this boy, and Kvothe wants to help, but he's been so conditioned.
Does the kid die?
I don't think so, but
either way, it's really sad.
Oh, it's horrible. So Kvothe has been so conditioned just to survive that before he even realizes it, he's like outside of his like hiding hole on the roof. This boy's surrounded by these men, and he's got a brick in his hands, and then he thinks about what he's doing, and he's like, if I were to even hit one of these guys, the rest of these people will be on the roof within moments, and my location of my home is revealed, so that's null and void. He has no backup plan. He wouldn't have enough time to gather his supplies. He kind of takes the coward's way out and does nothing. And Kvothe then kind of like pauses mid-story with Chronicler and tells him that if there's any reason or explanation to look into who he became for what reasons, it's here. And he says that during his like travels and adventures throughout his entire life, he's broken more bones and sustained more injuries than he can remember. But he remembers that young child cries for help clearer than anything. And it's his one true regret in life. And so I think it's a really interesting little piece of information that they added where it was like Kvothe's...
his like driving force.
Yeah.
Especially later when he becomes, like, powerful, I think stems from the fact that he wasn't there to help his
people
family, but he also wasn't there to help this stranger who he clearly identified with as a boy on the street without a family who'd been chased and hunted and beat up by other people. So it's just sad that he recognizes the fact that he has these shortcomings when he was a child and couldn't control the situation because he was young and not powerful enough, but it seems like he uses it as a motivating force for like why he became powerful later. I think we can only wait and see whether or not he uses those powers to protect the weak or not. I'm hoping he does, but I'm interested to see what book 3 brings.
Chapter 26, Lanre turned. So, with chapter 26, we get introduced to our boy, Skarpi.
I love
and
it. I love Skarpi.
This chapter is just really cool because we get Kvothe. He's, in Waterside heading towards Trapis's, and
he hears from a girl that there's a man in a bar who will tell stories, but if you come up with a story he doesn't know, you win a silver talent from him. And this, like, fantasy of not only, like, free entertainment, but also an unimaginable amount of money definitely sets Kvothe's head spinning for a little bit. And, like, he doesn't go there at first because he's had a run-in with the boy who jumped him the very first day he was in Tarbean and broke his lute. Whose name?
Pike.
Pike, that's it.
A goon named Pike. Pike is just every, like, badly drawn, like, bully that you see in a cartoon, or just, like, one huge crooked tooth. Like,
yeah, I was about to say buck teeth.
Yeah, like, you know what I mean? Just a
shirt that's a little too short and his, like, stomach's poking out.
Yeah, just, like, everything just lame.
I know.
So, backstory with the whole Pike thing. There's been a straight-up turf war with Pike.
Crazy revenge on this kid.
It's not even revenge. This is just, like, animalistic, like, barbarism at this point. So.
It's like not even territorialism. It's just out of control. And I don't think this kid Pike even realizes who Kvothe is or why he has a vengeance out for him.
I don't think he remembered that on his first day in Tarbean that he jumped him and broke his lute. So after
That's what I mean. I don't think he realizes that, like, he broke this kid's lute and now this kid is out for blood.
Yeah.
Once Kvothe does the first thing to him, then there's clearly, like, a recognition and, like, they see each other as enemies, but it's like Kvothe kind of sought him out and just, like, wrecked this kid's little hideaway.
Yeah, so Kvothe finds where Pike lives, and it's, like, literally, like, a cave of crates. And I always imagine, like, weirdly, like, lobster traps and, like, all these, like...
He does live by the waterfront.
Yeah, so I just imagine, like, this weird dwelling, and so Kvothe sees Pike and, like, one of his, like, fellow goons just kind of, like, strolling around the city, and so while the coast is clear, he finds, like, his dwelling, and he goes through Pike's stuff, he, like, eats his food and, like, drinks his beer, or, like, whatever alcohol he had.
Does he take his money, too?
Takes his money, and then he literally starts digging, and he finds Pike's, like, actual, like, treasured possessions, like, there's, like, a lock of hair, and, like, a photograph of either, like, a family member or somebody he cares about.
I assumed it was his mom.
Yeah.
Because he's clearly an orphan at this point, so I thought that was, like, the stuff from from his mom. I know that in the past in America, sometimes if people passed away, you would put, like, a little keepsake box in the ground for them, and usually it'd be a picture and sometimes a lock of hair. So I think that's where that comes from.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So Kvothe, just because of his hatred for Pike, straight up lights a fire and, like, burns down his, like, dwelling.
But rookie mistake, he waits too long.
Yeah, because he's like, relishing the moment.
I know, like, standing there all, like, manic and crazed of, like, yes, I've done it, and, like, just watching it go up in smoke, but then Pike and his friend come back.
And they jump Kvothe, and so Kvothe definitely gets, like, a couple licks in, but he really gets beat up pretty bad. And so it's just, like, round one.
I think he still feels like he came out on top, though. He's
like, definitely. Whatever, he destroyed his home.
I win.
He broke a couple of ribs and, like, lived to tell the tale.
Yep.
And so, round two with this vendetta, he ends up, like, procuring basically the equivalent of...
It's like grain alcohol.
It's like Everclear mixed with acid. It's like, if you were to drink it, you'll immediately get, like, sores in your mouth. It's, like, that potent and, like, acidic.
Is this supposed to be an alcohol you drink? Like, what is
I think it might be, like, a grain alcohol, like, cleanser, almost. Like, maybe, like, industrial cleaner.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
Jeez.
And so, somehow Kvothe had been, like, stalking Pike, and at one point, he pours this bottle
He leads
above
them
him.
to...
Oh, that's right, I'm sorry.
He, like, specifically leads them away to this alleyway where he set up a bucket of this alcohol on the roof, and it's very, like, Scooby-Doo trap of, like, be the bait, Shaggy and Scooby, and then we'll push the bucket over. But that's exactly what he does. So he gets into the specific alley and dumps his bucket on Pike, and then, like, throws a match. And it's so
up, like,
savage.
He
was like, I wanted this kid to ignite in a pillar of flame, and he didn't. He did catch on fire, though, which is really intense.
Especially because Kvothe's, what, like, 14 at this point?
I think 14 or 15 at this point, yeah.
And just, like, yes, he's had to do a lot to survive, but this is, like, his first act of, like, or second act of, like, malice.
Oh, that's true.
You know?
Yeah, and I think later in his life he tries to actively not be the aggressor.
Yeah.
in things. He tries to take a little bit more. He's definitely, like, will push back if he's pushed, but I don't think he's usually the one to start a physical or, like, harmful fight.
Yeah, so this is some pretty dark stuff. He straight up, like, roasts this kid.
Is this where one of the kids also has a knife made of glass, or was that the first fight?
That was during the first fight, so that was a backstory on the whole Kvothe and Pike rivalry, and basically, Pike's still alive, he's just probably just wrecked and gross now.
Scarred. Anyway, that's the reason Kvothe doesn't want to go to this bar, is because it's near the waterfront where Pike lives, and he doesn't want to be a target. But curiosity gets the best of him eventually.
And so he makes his way over to this bar, and it's called the Half-Mast. Skarpi kind of has like this ritual at this bar where all these children gather at the bar in order to hear stories, and if they can afford it, they all contribute like copper pennies and whatever change that they have in order to get Skarpi a drink at the bar. There's kind of like a ritual behind it where he'll get his wine or beer, whatever he's drinking, and he'll ask what story people want to hear. And everyone kind of chimes in what they want to hear, what they want to listen to. Kvothe, who's actually been close to mute for all these years in Tarbean, contributes and says he wants to hear about Lanre.
Yeah, he surprises himself and just kind of shouts out Lanre.
And so Skarpi, hearing that, is kind of intrigued as well because it's such an old story that he then decides to tell the story of Lanre.
Good thing he picked that one.
Oh, I know. Imagine if he showed up. He's like, and today we're going to learn about Yulish Knots.
Today is Jack and the Beanstalk.
Yeah, like just something.
And I know it's obviously like no one would ever write a story where that happens, where you get a totally pointless encounter. But it's just funny that like Kvothe goes and the first thing he wants to hear is the one that gets picked.
Yes. And so we finally kind of get the lore of Lanre and the Creation War.
Oh, this is a fantastic story.
And I really like how he starts it off. He's like, years ago and miles away, there was Mir Tornil, the Shining City.
It reminds me of Gondor.
Yeah.
Just like being like the beacon in all this war of like the final beautiful city.
You know what's kind of funny, too? Because they talk about Celotos and very much parallels to Denethor. He's the king of Mir
Tornil has a magical sight, and so does Denethor in The Lord of the Rings, who has, like, a magical foresight. Which is not how it's portrayed in the movies, at all.
Definitely, that'll be eventual episodes, Lord of the Rings.
But anyway, so Celotos uses his magical sight to help protect his city because there's been this war going on, the Creation War. At this time, we do not know the origin of the Creation War. We just know that it's a war that's been waged for centuries. And Celotos uses his magical sight to be able to see when armies are coming, or when... Is it armies or demons? Or armies of demons?
It's basically anytime conflict comes, he can use his power of sight to help avoid disaster. He's also a very powerful namer, which is useful because it grants him the power to basically shape the world around him.
But there are other cities that are still resisting. Antos, Veoret, Tunusa, Emlyn, Morilla, and Morella.
The twin cities.
And Myrtorinio. Obviously, the other cities are not using Celotos' magical sight to protect themselves, but they are still resisting. So these are like the last strongholds. And then enter Lanre, the hero.
Just the classic warrior man.
Yep, so he's described as terrible and wise. Oh, I'm sorry, that's his wife, Lyra. Enter Lanre and Lyra, the dynamic duo. So Lanre's powerful with a sword. He can't be tired out on the battlefield. There's at one point they mention he fights for 3 days straight. It's always where the fighting is thickest. So he's just like the perfect hero. And his wife Lyra is powerful. She's a powerful namer. So the two of them together create this like
it's a
unstoppable force.
Basically. Like Dungeons and Dragons duo. You get the barbarian, you have the wizard. He's like a berserker. He just like goes ham.
He's like a gentleman knight.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Because he's all about, like, truth and valor.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Which is why his corruption hurts even more.
Yes.
So Lanre and Lyra are there, and they're, like, pushing back against their enemies. This is like the first time in hundreds of years that people couldn't even talk about the possibility of peace or an end to the creation war. There's this battle, the Block of Drossen Tor, which is that battle I mentioned that lasted for 3 days straight. And it's kind of a draw. No side can defeat the other. And it ends in this epic battle of Lanre fighting this great beast with scales of black iron, whose breath was a darkness that smothered men.
As a little side note, it almost sounds like he's describing a Dracus.
Oh, it does.
Just a thought. I never considered that until I'm reading it now.
That's so cool. So Dracus has only come up so far in The Mating Habits of the Common Dracus, which was the book that Chronicler wrote and Kvothe mentioned reading, which is where Chronicler said he went searching for a dragon but found a lizard.
Yep.
Well, I guess this podcast has spoilers, but the Dracus comes in at the end of this book as well. But I think this one is supposed to be...
more of a mythological creature.
I think it's supposed to be a demon, because... So Lanre kills it, but Lanre also dies while killing it, and the end of the battle finishes with the enemy being set beyond the Doors of Stone. And the Doors of Stone is the name of the third book in this series. Several times throughout the book, different types of doors come up, but I believe waystones are considered to be the Doors of Stone that lead to the Fey Realm. So I'm assuming that these are demons and they've been pushed back into the Fey Realm and locked behind the Doors of Stone. Unfortunately, Lanre died in this conflict, and Lyra comes and uses naming to pull him back from death. She tries a few different times and fails, but eventually, Lanre wakes up, and we're not really sure how she does it, except for the fact that she is a powerful namer. That's all we know.
Yeah, no, there's no explanation on it. It's just... And I think part of it for this story, at least with Skarpi, is it's almost through her powers as Namer, and through the power of love, she brings him back from death, like that kind of deal.
Yeah, but it's crazy because the next part of the story is Lyra dies, and Lanre tries to bring her back, but because he's not a powerful Namer, he can't do it.
Right.
But either way, so Lanre and Lyra are back for a little bit. They are victorious, the war continues, but everyone's starting to gain hope. Especially because Lanre, came back from the dead, and he's their golden boy.
The champion.
He can do no wrong. Except for, boy, does he do the worst wrong.
He can do no wrong until this.
Until he does the wrongest wrong. Years go by, the enemies are kind of dissipating, and people are coming to hope for the end of the war. But then there's all these rumors, Lyra's sick, Lyra's kidnapped, Lyra might be dead. Lanre has disappeared, Lanre's mad. So there's this kind of bizarre confusion going on about something bad has happened to them, but we're not sure what it is. So then Lanre shows up in Mir Ternial by himself. And he's it's really cool because he has a silver sword and a habergeon, which is a chainmail shirt, and it's made of black iron scales, which is what the enemy he vanquished was that killed him.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. He actually rotted out of the carcass of the beast he killed at Drossen Tor. So yes. He's wearing,
the skin of his enemies.
What would be the equivalent of, dragon scales for armor. And that's so cool.
Very cool.
But he asks Selitos to come with him outside the city because they need to talk, and Selitos and he have been friends. And because all these rumors have been going around, Selitos is smart and doesn't immediately be like, "Where's Lyra?" But plays it cool. Yeah,
so they walk towards the mountain pass, and Selitos kind of calls a spade. He
gets
I heard your wife is unwell. And Lanre doesn't really say anything until he actually then binds Selitos. And Selitos is completely taken back by this because he is a master namer. Very few equal his power naming.
I think they
save for Lyra, Eax, or otherwise known as Jax, which we learn about later on. And a character named Arua.
We've never encountered Arua yet, right?
No.
In either of the 2 books in this series?
No, not yet. So Lanre does him dirty. He straight up binds him in the name of Stone. And he then commands the air to lay leaden upon his tongue so he can't use any naming to get himself out of his situation. And then he also declares that all his powers fail him, but his power of sight. Celatos is truly just, like, in statue mode. He can't move, he can't
It reminds
talk.
me of Harry Potter when Dumbledore, like, freezes Harry so that Snape can kill him. And even though it's, like, watching this, like, horrible, horrible thing happen, there's nothing you can do about it. You're just completely immobile.
At this point, since Celatos is stuck, a whole army then marches towards Mir Terrenial, and people don't see it till it's way too late. So it is just sieged for a day and a night. The white walls are charred black. People are being slaughtered. The whole city that was once beautiful and a symbol of hope and peace has just been destroyed and blackened and ruined. Eventually, after everyone has been kind of murdered and the city's been destroyed, Lanre unbinds him.
Oh, thanks.
Celatos is like just clever.
Why, dude?
Yeah,
Why?
And he asks Celatos, he's like, was I a good man? And he says, you were counted among the best of us. You were beyond reproach. And he says, yeah, I did this.
Ugh, heartbreaking.
Lanre then admits that his wife is dead, and deceit and treachery brought him to it, but her death is on his hands. And what my theory is somehow when Lyra brought him back from like death's door, he came back, but I'm sure there had to have been some like equivalent exchange or compensation, and somehow his soul was corrupted by being brought back.
Do you think somehow Lyra traded her soul for his?
There had to have been something, because he clearly got his skill in naming from her, whether it was he took it by force or like...
Oh, you think he got his skill in naming from Lyra?
Yeah, she's
I
dead,
thought
and all of a sudden...
he got it from Encanis and basically made a deal with the devil.
Ooh, that's a good thought, too.
That was my theory, and that he traded his immortality, or like his free will, for the power to bring Lyra back, and then in doing so essentially became like a slave of whoever this higher, darker power is.
That's a great point.
Because, as we learn, he becomes Haliax, leader of the Chandrian, but the Chandrian themselves aren't out of control bad. It seems like they're a tool of someone else, maybe. Like, if they were just a bad force, they would be more like Encanis or the demons and just go around causing problems everywhere they go.
No, what my personal theory was, when Lanre came back, his soul was corrupted because, the dead should rest, and so...
Yeah, you can never come back from the dead without there being some kind of... especially in books.
Yeah.
Without there being some kind of, deal or compensation, or... Sometimes when people come back from the dead, they're, not right.
He's come back, and I think he's been corrupted, and he then sacrifices Lyra for his own ambitions, and somehow acquires her skill in naming, but tries to bring her back as she did for him, and he can't.
Oh, that's so sad.
Because he pauses, he says, my wife is dead, deceit and treachery brought me to it, but her death is on my hands.
That's true. He clearly is responsible for her death, but I never really thought about him actively killing her. I thought somehow she made a deal, and he felt this enormous guilt that she sacrificed herself for him, basically.
There's definitely multiple ways to interpret, what actually went down.
Yeah, and I don't think we're going to know, but those are both good theories.
And so Celatos is like, well, it's never too late. Things can be okay, and Lanre's just fully things will never be okay. I can't die. The person I loved is gone forever, and I'm just content to make the world cease to exist, because if I can't end, then the world should end around me, basically. He's kind of making this declaration of, to destroy the world.
Yeah, if I can't be happy, nobody can.
Celatos is, at this point, alright, enough's enough. This can't go on any further. I've been a fool not to see what's been going on, and so in a very, not even poetic, dramatic, turn of events, he picks up a jagged shard of mountain glass and stabs himself in the eye and literally blinds himself as in one eye as a reminder to never be so foolish and blind to what's happening around him.
It's sad, though, because at that time, too, Lanre, like, a glimmer of his old self comes out, and he's like, can you kill me, please? That's the only way I'll ever be able to escape this fate. He knows it's hopeless, like, that Slitos also realizes he won't actually be able to kill him and keep him dead because of whatever kind of dark magic has corrupted Lanre. But I think Lanre's still in there, like, deep, deep down, and is remorseful, but also just, like, so disturbed.
After Salitos has, like, blinded himself, and I can't tell, like, yes, it was very much, like, a metaphorical and, like, a real example of, like, him being blind, but I also can't tell if it was, like, a blood magic thing with naming that he did this, because after stabbing himself in the eye, he then enchants or curses Lanre with a darkness over his face and kind of twists him into this, like, shadowed-faced evil that he can't get rid of. And that's how he becomes what we know as Haliax. There is this really cool line, though, where he says, "This is my doom upon you. May your face be always held in shadow, black as the toppled towers of my beloved Mir Tornil. This is my doom upon you. Your name will be turned against you, that you shall have no peace. This is my doom upon you. All who follow you, may it last until the world ends, and Aleu fall nameless from the sky."
The Aleu are like angels, correct?
Yeah.
So I think that is the creation of the Chandrian right there. All who follow you will last until the end of the world. So unintentionally, Salitos creates
Like a prophecy.
a prophecy and the legacy that becomes fulfilled, creating the Chandrian. He's also really upset because Lanre didn't kill or destroy just the one city. He destroyed all but one of those last standing cities. And there's a lot of theories about which city was the one that wasn't destroyed and where it is now in Kvothe's world, which we can probably discuss later on in the books.
I do have a theory, though, about this kind of prophecy that Salitos declared.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, "May it last until the world ends and Aleu falls nameless from the sky."
And or.
And Aleu falls nameless from the sky. Could it be kind of where we find a present-day Kvothe, where the world's kind of coming to an end because the Fey realm is mixing with the human world?
Possibly. I think when he means when the world ends, he probably means when the human world ends.
Yeah, like of all time.
But this was also called the Creation War. So I'm wondering if there will be, like, what's the opposite of creation? A destruction, essentially. The Creation War isn't the creation of the world. It's, as we come to find out later, it's the creation of the Fey realm separate from the human realm.
Yeah.
So the destruction of those separate realms would be the opposite of what just happened and might be the end of the world in terms of that prophecy, which would mean the end of the Chandrian, because I think we're hoping that Kvothe's destiny is to destroy the Chandrian.
Yeah.
And that would fulfill that whole prophecy there.
This kind of wraps up Skarpi's telling of the creation war of Lanre to all these children at the half-mast bar. You know, the kids all have questions, and they thank Skarpi for telling the story, and the herd starts thinning out a little bit. And it's only until Kvothe is the last one in, and he thanks Skarpi for the story, and he
this
then
is like
opens
the first
up.
time he's talked about his family at all. It's a really fascinating conversation. Skarpi talks about just like the general rules and says like give a coin if you have one to spare, and clearly recognizes that Kvothe is poor and needs the money. But he also talks about having knowledge of stories, but that all stories are one story. All of the pieces are growing around us, and it's in all of these little nooks and crannies in the whole world, and the story isn't broken, it's all interconnected, which I think is just a fascinating way to look at history. But then Kvothe actually says there's no good story that doesn't touch the truth, and this is something that his father used to say, and I think he feels very strange talking to someone, and especially feels very strange bringing up something about his family and his father. I think he gets a little like skittish and overwhelmed because he has these emotions clearly start coming out about remembering his family, and is kind of starting to leave, but clearly wants to know more. So he kind of inarticulately asks is it true, the story? And Skarpi says, all stories are true, but this one really happened. Which is very important, I think, in terms of Lanre and his transformation into Haliax and Kvothe coming to the realization that he has encountered Haliax in the Chandrian. But that brings us to the end of this chapter.
Chapter 27, His Eyes Unveiled. We get Kvothe leaving the bar, and he's just happy and smiling and buoyant, knowing that he's going to get a chance to hear a story soon, because living on the streets, it's usually just like pickpocket, scavenge, beg, survive, so to have entertainment is really just uplifting for him.
Just to have something to look forward to. I think everything has been such like instinctual need of like, I need food now, or I need sleep now, or I need to be warm now. Like, actually, this is like the first time he's actually kind of interacted with other people and not lived just for the purpose of living for himself.
Right. And so as he's walking down the street, he kind of has this whole like tingling feeling in the back of his mind as if he's forgetting something and he can't quite figure out what it is. Like, Kvothe is narrating the fact that he's been a Tarbean for 3 years and a large portions of his mind are still inactive and subconscious. And so he doesn't realize what it is that he's trying to remember until he is going towards a bar or a nearby inn where he gets a mug of really strong beer. And he's kind of just doing his day drinking thing, just kind of sipping pleasantly, hanging out.
Good for him. I feel like he never has anything nice happen.
Exactly. So he's enjoying his buzz. He's enjoying his beer as the afternoon's waning towards the evening. And as he's about to place the mug back at the inn, he sees a Tellan priest walk by, and he's like, all right, I'm all set. The last thing I want to do is be drunk on morning and deal with a Tellan priest. So he kind of like sidesteps towards an alley. And this priest is carrying a torch because it's, towards the evening time. And when he turns, the priest doesn't see Kvothe, but his face is covered with a hood and is draped in shadow.
And it just jolts him.
Yes, he has this like epiphany moment where he's like,
so
wait
good.
a minute. Lanre was Haliax. Haliax is part of the Chandrian. The Chandrian killed my family because they were telling the story of Lanre. And it's like all these like puzzle pieces like clicking together, and he's like, oh my god. He's just absolutely dumbstruck because Skarpi even admitted like part of his story contained the truth, and now he has
physical proof of it because he's literally interacted with the person from the story.
Yes.
And he realizes he needs more information, so he's all, like, excited about, like, going back to get more information from Skarpi. But he's also just so overwhelmed, he doesn't know what to do. He's like, do I kill the Chandrian? Do I find Lanre? What do I, how do I do any of this? I'm just a child living on the streets. Like, what's my next move?
Yeah, because living Tarbean has taught him such a hard practicality that he kind of laughs. He's like, I can't kill the Chandrian. I can hardly survive on my own, let alone go after these godlike creatures and people that have the ability to, like, wipe out thousands of people.
Mm-hmm. I think it's actually really interesting from a book perspective, too, because there's so many main characters whose, like, destiny becomes laid out before them, and they'll just up and leave and be like, yes, I have to go fight, or I have to go learn, or train, or whatever, travel, self-actualize, yeah, absolutely. And they just kind of up and leave from their life, and there's never the practicality of money or family that stands in their way, and he has this grandiose notion of getting revenge on the Chandrian. I mean, that's his end goal. But getting there, he's like, I don't know how to start doing that. Like, I don't even have enough food for tomorrow.
He doesn't even have shoes.
I don't have shoes. I don't have a family. I don't have any weapons or knowledge. I don't have, good clothes. I think at this point he mentions he's been wearing a burlap sack for a shirt for a while. So it's just this, like, frustrating feeling of, like, knowing what he wants and having this, like, grand calling to do it.
But not knowing that next step.
But not knowing what to do. Like, he can see the end point, but he can't see, like, the ladder that's going to get him there.
No. that's where we're going to leave off with this episode. We reached a really good kind of break in the story where Kvothe is going to go back and listen to another Skarpi stories and hopefully get some information directly from Skarpi, more about Lanre and maybe even the Chandrian.
Yep. Next episode will cover the chapters up through chapter 32, which is the rest of Kvothe's time in Tarbean, and he will finally make his great escape from this horrible city. And until then, definitely check us out on our website, as I mentioned earlier, and happy reading! This podcast was recorded by Anna Opushinsky and Sam Furman, edited by Anna Opushinsky, produced by Anna Opushinsky and Sam Furman, with webpage and artwork designed by Anna Opushinsky.
Thanks, listeners. If you're looking for more, check us out at fantasticbookspod.com, where we have book reviews, reading list suggestions, merch, and you can even send us a message.
Or find us on Facebook and Instagram at Fantastic Books Pod.
And if you like what you've been hearing, don't forget to leave us a review.
Thanks.
Goldenrise Media.